Okay. Welcome, everyone. Okay, well, Peter is here, so we can start now. Okay. Welcome, everyone, to the last session of IETF 124 and the second session of OAUTH. Let's get going. Hopefully, you've seen this before. Just a reminder, this is not well applies. Please behave in a professional manner, respect your peers, make sure you understand your obligation, and you understand also that IPR regulations and what impacts you, right? So hopefully you've seen this. Let's get going. Hopefully you've seen that already. So I'm gonna skip and keep going. Status, we've seen this. Let's go to our agenda. So as you can see, have packed agenda again. I'm not gonna go through all of them, but I'm gonna mention there are 2 additions to this list. If we have time, we might squeeze a minute or 2 for those 2 additions. So Mike and Jeff, please remind me at the end if I forget, okay? So that's our agenda. Any bashing, any questions? If not, I'm hopefully Paul is available online. Paul, yeah, there you go.
Hello.
Hey, Paul. Share the slides.
Thank you very much. Yes.
Let me pass
So welcome, everyone.
Hold on. Let me pass you the control. Oh, yeah. Thank you. Pam, thank you, Pam. Appreciate that. Okay, Paul, go ahead.
Thanks, Rifat. So welcome, everyone. First topic is attestation-based client authentication. We'll give some updates what happened since last IETF and what the major discussion points are.
Sorry, just forgot to mention that unfortunately Hannes is not here. He couldn't join us, so we'll fly solely here. Okay, go ahead, Paul. Sorry.
No worries. So we had one new release since last IETF, which is version 7. Version 6 was just released before IETF 123. So the new one is 07. We had several changes in there that we copied the history from here. I don't want to go into the details of those because I think they're all not major changes. Some of them are normative changes, but all kind of minor in our opinion. If you have any question to those changes, we could address this in the end in the questions. Otherwise, I would move forward. I see that one slide is missing here. Apparently, we didn't upload the last one. So let me quickly say what I wanted to say. What's the current status of the draft? So we got a lot of feedback from last IETF 123, which we mostly incorporated. We have about 2 to 3 major topics open. Apart from that, all open issues are mostly editorial from our view. And in the following slides, we'll go into those 3 open issues. We've also discussed them, for example, at IIW, so we're presenting here some thoughts that we have around this. I think on some of this, we kind of have a lot of agreement from OAuth people, from several people, individuals. And we have the intention to reach maybe a working group last call before the next IETF meeting. We think that's kind of possible. So let's jump into the three issues that we have. The first one is using this draft as something that is not client authentication. So current situation is that the mechanism described in this draft is defined as a client authentication mechanism. Issue is that OAuth only allows one type of client authentication, but we've received numerous feedbacks that people like this mechanism, and some of those people would like to use this mechanism as an additional mechanism next to some other client authentication scheme that they have. And so the proposed direction here is that we define the client attestation foremost as a generic mechanism instead of defining it explicitly as a client authentication mechanism, but then define in the draft that client authentication can be used as a client authentication and also like how to do that. But that's kind of like an optional feature. I was told this is similar to what OAuth did with MTLS. And yeah, that would allow those people that want it as an additional signal to use it as such. And maybe then also the idea came up because I think there was a lot of discussion about the naming of the draft. But if we kind of say it's not foremost or it's not necessarily client authentication, then likely we should remove that from the title of the draft. So we could rename that to keybound client attestation. That was a proposal that we received. So that's the first topic. I would present all three topics and then we can have the discussion in the end. Second topic is about client ID. The current situation is, or how the draft is designed, that we say we attest what we call client instances. So client instance is an individual deployment software, likely of one specific device. But that could be part of like a bigger client solution. Taking the example from the wallet case and in OpenID for VC, using this draft, client ID is defined for the whole wallet solution. So a particular wallet provider kind of has one client ID for all his devices that are running his app. And we say that in the client attestation JOT, we have the subject value, which must be equal to the client ID, and then in the client attestation pop JOT, we have that as an ISS value, and that has to match the client ID. And apart from that, we've also witnessed a lot of discussion that client ID in general is becoming quite vague in OAuth, and it's not so sure what client ID sometimes actually means. Don't really have a proposed direction, but more like questions here. Does it make more sense to make the client ID individual for client instances, or should we say that the client ID is kind of relevant to the class of client instances, or should we remain in the current situation, just not having any statement about this? Other question that's kind of related to this is that if we make it individual to, or if we bind more to individual client IDs, then we could also bind it to the public key, because that's kind of the important piece of this draft. So if we say, well, the key from the client instance where the client attestation is bound to is kind of the core piece. And we could also say, well, client ID kind of relates to this public key. There is a proposal to, for example, use the JSON web key thumbprint of the public key as as a client ID. And this is also related to the discussion of binding several resources like the refresh token to that. And in the particular example of the refresh token, we actually already say in the draft that this is bound to the key, but there's also the question about like other resources and whether these are then bound to the client ID.
Paul, you have a few people in the queue. Do you want to take comments, questions now? It seems appropriate because people will have.
Okay.
Yes. Let's go.
Let's go.
Hi, Aaron Parecki. I don't know how popular of an opinion this is, but I feel like at this point, if you look at what's deployed and what the kind of direction things are going, it feels to me like client ID does generally reference the family of software, like the class of software, rather than an instance. And we have other things that can identify instances, for example, depop keys now. And I feel like that is generally the direction things are going. And I'm happy with it, and I would like to continue that direction. So especially if you look at the new client ID metadata document draft, which uses a URL as a client ID, that obviously does not correspond to a client instance. And I think that also continues to establish that pattern. And the other thing, Justin's not in the queue, so I will speak for him. Justin submitted a draft a long time ago to add the concept of client instances into OAuth. And I think that's also an interesting idea that would solve some other things that I have been trying to solve for a while. And I brought in a proposal a while ago that was similar to it. I think Justin's is probably actually a better direction. So I think maybe reviving that topic would be a better path, and just keep client ID as the family that it kind of means now. 2010 that was.
Would you say we should make it explicit in our draft, or should we leave it open?
I don't know if you need to make it explicit, but I wouldn't want to see something that explicitly made it refer to the client instance, especially if it did things bound to the instance.
Okay.
So Aaron, question to you, like, is that captured somewhere that we are kind of recommending client ID to be a group of things instead of instance?
I don't know if I would say it's captured anywhere, but it's reflected in a lot of the recent work, including the inverse being that depop is now more commonly being used to identify instances of clients, right? So I don't know if it's like, it's not explicitly written down anywhere, but it's kind of the direction that things are going.
Should that go into 2.1?
Possibly.
Okay.
I think it was one of Justin's comments on 2.1. I'll go look at the list of issues to see if I can find it.
Okay. Awesome. Thanks.
I just want to agree with a lot of what Aaron said. I feel like this draft actually, last time I read it, had a fairly reasonable treatment of the idea of an instance and a class, and it made a lot of sense when I read it. So I was a little disappointed to see this discussion because I thought it was kind of a solved thing. Either way, though, I think everything Aaron said was right. And even if we don't like the situation, it's the established situation, and this draft is absolutely not the place to try to fix it because it's like a narrow extension point. So some clarity maybe is warranted in the draft, but nothing that tries to redefine the concept of an instance versus a class or how you represent that in a client ID. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Brian. Philip.
Likewise, I think when you read the draft today, this is absolutely clear. I don't think we need to make it more explicit either one of the ways. I would not appreciate if there was a language that would preclude from the client ID being an instance key, likewise it being a family of clients. Today, this is left sort of unspecified, but it allows both options. And that's to say also in 2.1, we should leave it like that so that both deployments are possible. Since we're taking questions in your last slide, the one about using the draft outside of client authentication. When it comes to accessing resources, most probably some of the claims need to either go or be changed, such as the target audience is no longer the authorization server. It would now be the resource identifier. But that's something that I'm pretty sure you thought of.
But would you be positive of this change?
Yeah, I don't think the way it is used today, or I don't think the way it is described today already precludes it from being used as a general mechanism. Because when we say that clients can only have one authentication method or must only use one authentication method, it really depends. Just like with the example that you say this is similar to OAuth and TLS, I think you mean OAuth and TLS sender constraining, where it's possible to have a client using PKJOT, but still provide an MTLS client key. And those are, from the message standpoint, two authentication methods that are present in the message. But one of them is the client authentication method being PKJOT, and the other one is there for sender constraining. And even though it is represented exactly the same way as if it was used for MTLS client auth, I think that's something that implementations already need to tackle with. But making it clearer so that there's a general mechanism and then optionally making it client authentication makes sense.
Okay, thanks. On
Schuster, I'm glad you bring this up. This is in regards to the client ID one, because later I'll be presenting a draft also profiling client authentication, and we have somewhat a similar problem that the client ID, or like the subject in the client attestation, is not actually the client ID because it actually describes the specific instance and not the class. So I really think we as a working group should work on this problem, whether here or in other places. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Arndt. Jeff.
Yeah, Jeff Lombardo. So yeah, like just double clicking onto everything else, like don't define it here and let's work it into a separate draft. This is for client authentication. So just finalize that. If you need attestation extension, like a PKC or Depop or whatever other extensions that we have into OAuth, let's just do an additional draft onto that to be used on the side if it needs to be used on top of other client authentication, I think. So this should be like separate problematic so that they can live their life differently if needed be. And the whole class of client ID versus instance, client ID as an instance is the same discussion as we got for identifier into WIMSI. So that might be something that might be to think more largely onto how to approach it.
Okay, thanks. Atul.
Yeah, hi, Atul Tulshibagule. I think this spec could be neutral to whether this is an instance or a class. And I was actually wondering if the client ID metadata would allow instances, because it does support a path in the client ID metadata URL. So,
Atul, speak to the mic.
I was wondering if the client ID metadata would actually allow instances for client IDs, because it supports a path in the URL spec, and so I didn't assume that it would. Okay.
Okay, thanks, Atul. Mike.
Mike Jones, we've been talking about this at least since dynamic client registration. Section 8.4 of client registration, which I'm not going to read, is titled Client ID per Instance or per Client Software. And we explicitly, Justin nods, took the position that we're not going to take a position That's been the position in our RFCs ever since, and I don't think we should change it.
But what's the de facto? What's happening there right now?
And I agree, this draft is not the place to do it, even if we touch it.
Okay. Justin, go ahead.
Since I've been invoked a few times, Justin Richer. Yes, we did say that back then. The world has definitely changed in ways we didn't entirely predict. So it is, I do think that it is the reality that client ID is most often a class of clients. It is sometimes, especially if you're using dynamic registration, very explicitly an instance of a client. And I think that that's something that 2.1 could just say without really raising a lot of, anything else. I think that this draft can say that this is intended to be bound to the instance. That seems to be clearly the direction that the attestation is going, without saying it's bound to the client ID necessarily. It's probably a good idea in practice to bind it to the client ID. And if we can get implementation experience on what that gives us, whether we do it or don't, that's great. Fully agree with everybody that said that this is not the draft to solve the client ID problem. Client IDs are a mess. And I also put forward a draft that says you don't actually need client ID if you're using PAR anyway. So maybe we should also do that. So there's so many different ways to solve this for different classes of clients, right? And that's just the reality that we're in, whether we like it or not.
Yeah. Thanks, Justin. Pam.
Do we want to litigate this now? Because I don't want you guys to go.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So, like Paul, you have 1 minute.
We
Do you
had
wanna
one more
introduce-
topic, which I want to
Yeah.
very shortly.
Introduce that topic, and then we can take it to the list and how to proceed. with that.
Yes. So the last topic that is still open is the Depop optimization. If we use client attestation together with Depop, there are some voices that say we should not use two proof of possessions because, if we use this together, we have a proof of possession from the Depop key and we have a proof of possession from the client attestation. So there's a proposal to kind of skip the client attestation POP if the Depop is there and they use the same key. And there is some discussion how to do this. Should we do this? How should we flag this? And what is mandatory to implement for whom? If you have opinions, then please let us know.
Okay. Thanks, Paul. Arndt, quickly.
I have a clarifying question. Like, what would be the reason to do both? Is it really necessary to
So
present?
what do you mean by both? You could use client attestation without Depop, then you definitely need the client attestation POP.
But like, why do you need to provide two proof of key possession if the key is the same?
That's what it's saying.
That's the proposal, to not do that.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, it makes sense.
Because if the key is in a remote HSM, it kind of gets expensive to do two proof of possessions.
Okay. Thank you, Paul.
Thanks.
The floor is yours.
Thanks. Okay. Hi, Aaron Parecki. This was a photo out of my hotel window from this week. Does this have control?
Coming. Now.
There we go. Thank you. Okay, so client ID metadata document. Quick update on what it is and changes and where we want to go with this. The short description is this is a way for clients to publish metadata about themselves on a URL and then use that URL as a client ID in an authorization request. Speaking of client IDs. The this is what it looks like. So a simple client ID document contains the properties that you would find in the registry established by dynamic client registration. So any client property can show up in the metadata, including things that are extensions defined by extensions later. Why? Why is this useful? So this is mainly useful when it is not possible to pre-register clients at the authorization server. If it is possible to pre-register clients with the authorization server and you want to do that, please go ahead and keep doing that. If that is not possible, this is an option for how to coordinate clients between clients that don't know about authorization servers ahead of time. So common applications of this would be things like apps that connect to self-hosted web services like Mastodon or WordPress, because there is no single database that you can register in. Another recent application of this has come up in the MCP world, where MCP clients want to be able to be used with servers that don't know about the clients ahead of time, or vice versa. So what is new since last time we talked? This is been adopted. Thank you. So this is adopted at the beginning of last month. And during the call for adoption process, we got a lot of good feedback on the draft. I did not change anything about the draft between the version 3 and the adopted version, and kind of held back on those comments until now. So here we are, and I want to quickly go through the feedback and get a sense of whether people think these comments should be incorporated. Oh yeah, also wanted to call out, since the last time we talked, this has been now voted on by the MCP community, the working group, and they are going to be referencing this in the update they are doing to the MCP spec, which is coming out later this month. Okay. Oh yeah, before we get to the things that I wanted to discuss, I wanted to give a little bit more context for some of the use cases, because I feel like that's helpful background when we do get to the discussion. One question, as I'm sure you probably, first thing you think of when you're like, you mean as an authorization server, I have to go fetch external data and show it to a user? That sounds terrible. Turns out, actually, this mechanism can be used without fetching the data at all, and it does provide some value. For example, in an enterprise, when you actually do explicitly pre-register all client data, you can still use the client ID URL as the identifier and pre-register in your enterprise IDP and provide the data manually, or fetch it one time at registration and have an admin review it. So the important thing that this does, that doesn't sound very different from what we do today with pre-registering the data, but what it does do is it means that clients that are using this spec and using this URL as a client ID don't have to do anything different when they talk to enterprise IDPs that are doing pre-enrolled clients, as opposed to the current world where they have to do something different if they're going to work with IDPs that expect pre-enrolled clients. So that's, I think, extremely valuable. You're probably also wondering about client impersonation. What's stopping somebody else from using this URL in their client? Okay, web server clients have a very easy answer. We have a JWKS URI property in the registry. They can publish public keys there. They're a web server client. They can hold onto a private key and sign requests with that private key. That's straightforward. iOS, a little bit more complicated, iOS and Android, but as we heard in the last draft, this is one of the uses of that draft in a non-wallet context. So that draft describes this client attester backend, which that would be where the private keys live that are published at the JWKS URI. And then you use that attestation-based client authentication draft, possibly to be renamed soon, to be able to turn it into essentially a confidential client. On desktop, the story is not so good. There are no standardized patterns for things like app attestation or app claimed URL schemes on desktop apps. So you kind of on your own to figure that one out. You could maybe figure out some stuff to use your MDM tools to push data around to do it. Maybe we can also try to convince the desktop operating systems to launch an equivalent of iOS and Android's app attestation, but that one is still largely unsolved. But this is, I didn't mention it earlier, but this draft is a essentially alternative to dynamic client registration for the situation where you can't pre-coordinate. And this at least gives us tools to handle this client impersonation problem in a way that isn't really possible with DCR. I don't need to go over this. This is the example of how, what a JWKS URI would look like. And again, this is, I want to reiterate the point though, that a client that does have keys and a client that doesn't have keys actually end up still working very similarly. And there isn't this sort of hard fork code path that you have to do based on how the server that you're working with. This is what the native app one looks like. I think I just talked through it already. Oh, I guess the one question here is, should this actually be explicitly mentioned in the draft? Because right now it's only kind of hinted at in a single paragraph that kind of describes at a high level how you could do it. One option is to actually more formally document it and explicitly reference how you would actually do it with the attestation-based client authentication draft. So thoughts on that are welcome. And then some of the other things that again, some of this stuff is mentioned in the draft, and there's an opportunity to kind of go deeper with it and clarify more. And if everybody thinks that's a good idea, I will absolutely do that. But this is the idea of on the consent screen, or based on internal policies, you actually have a lot of opportunities to do interesting things based on your own decision and risk profile, based on the client ID URL. Which again, we could be more explicit about some of these recommendations. Go ahead.
Justin Richer, I've actually deployed something like this with an enterprise OIDC server. Works pretty well in our experience. Definitely takes users by surprise, or at least it did 15 years ago whenever I did that. But yeah, no, I love this pattern. I'd love to see us kind of embrace this, especially as we start debating more about what client ID means and all of that, or there's sort of wider space of things. So this, cool. Because there's a continuum of trust, right? And this is embracing that continuum, and I love to see that.
Cool, thanks. And again, I want to reiterate one more time that all of this is authorization server policy, and the client doesn't do anything different, and the authorization server can do all of this stuff on its own. So better interop story there. Cool.
Yeah. Kalia, do you have a comment, question? No.
No. Okay. Another reputation thing that the AS can do is things like domain health, which again, there's plenty of precedent for. As I was making this slide, I was like, I wonder what would happen if I typed in googie.com into my browser, and sure enough, this popped up. So, the browser is keeping a list of, easy typos and warnings. So there's, again, opportunity for an authorization server to do things like that. Yeah, so the other common red flag people usually have is like, okay, what happens when I have never seen a client ID URL before? What do I do? So one thing you could do, like I just described, incrementally lowering the guard on the consent screens until it's been authorized enough. Another one is to create an internal client record that is associated with the user who's authorizing rather than the developer. Typically clients, we want to associate clients with developer accounts, but there's no actual requirement for that. And in this case of you want users to be able to use authorization servers to connect to clients that they haven't seen, you're actually kind of more establishing a relationship between the user and the AS more than the client developer and the AS. You could rate limit the crap out of access tokens that are issued in this way. Like there's no reason you have to apply the same rate limits to every client. So these are all just, again, tools that you can use to reduce the risk of that you might be thinking of when you're thinking about untrusted clients or unseen, previously before unseen clients. Okay. Now to the planned updates. This is stuff that was all commented on during the call for adoption. I am going to go through all these in individual slides. So yeah, this is based on people who have been in the middle of implementing this, as well as the call for adoption comments. SSRF mitigations, there is already a section for SSRF mitigations. There's more we can say there for sure. If you have any thoughts on that, please contribute on this issue or on the list. The current changes that I am planning on incorporating are these. So recommending that actually the AS doesn't fetch the data until the user is logged in. That basically means that visiting a logged out page doesn't trigger a fetch. Also, sending an explicit accept header will enable a server to quickly, earlier reject even responding with, for example, a large image file that might be sent maliciously as a client ID, and also avoid fetching if the DNS of the client ID resolves to private use IP address ranges. Those all seem like reasonable approaches. There are PRs for some of these already there, so planning on merging those. Generally seeing some nods. Great. If you have any pushback on these, please feel free to queue up. Another one is to restrict the properties of values that are URLs in the metadata to HTTPS URLs. And the reason for that is because if you don't, there are things you could do like put a JavaScript URL or a Apple Shortcuts URI or other creative things as a logo URI or a client URL. And then if the AS is going to render an image or provide a link to the user, that would be bad if it's not a HTTPS URL. And again, we're all in the web context here anyway, so it seems fine. Cool. Okay. Not hearing anybody complain about that one. Another PR that is ready to merge is additional security considerations for changes in the metadata. This is, again, one of those things where it doesn't make sense to create a strict rule about it, but it is worth calling out. So if an AS notices that properties of the client metadata change, which could be anything from the logo to the name to the redirect URI, those all have different risk levels of what that means. And at some point, maybe it actually represents something different than the user originally authorized. So maybe you actually want to revoke the consent that was granted to the previous version of the document. It's all very much a judgment call, so it feels like it's worth pointing out, but maybe not making strict recommendations for. Great. This one I think is actually pretty important. Right now, there's actually language that says that you need to find the client ID in the document that matches the URL you fetched. However, there's nothing that prevents the metadata from being served from a redirected to URL, which then would already cause that to fail anyway. So it seems like a quick win to make it require an HTTP 200 response on the metadata, not allowing redirects. Great. And there are some more issues worth discussing on the GitHub, but those were the ones that were all kind of like all the pending feedback from the last call for adoption. So that's where we're at, and I think that means we will go ahead and process all those.
Anybody has any concerns with any of those? Brian?
I didn't have any concerns. I just wanted to say we've implemented this. We're using it in the Brian Newbold, sorry, from Blue Sky. We've included this in part of the AT protocol, AT kind of like profile for OAuth. It's been working pretty well for us. We've been able to make it work pretty ergonomically for developers in the ecosystem. We have hundreds of unique client IDs, so like distinct client apps working through a whole ecosystem. And basically, it's just been a joy to work with Aaron and Amelia, and it's working well for us.
Thanks.
Okay.
Hi, Max Gerber, Stitch. We've also implemented this. I know KeyCard and VS Code and other folks in the MCP community have implemented it as well. And for the most part, we really like it. One thing that we're running into trouble with is preview environments, where people will go and they'll spin up a preview for every single change. Those usually get a unique domain name, and then that's now a unique client ID. And we're looking for better advice on how to handle that.
Thanks.
Okay. Next one.
Was that it? Great. Okay. 12 seconds left. Perfect.
So hold on. Amelia, do you have a quick comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in and say in the previous meeting, we had a text in about development client ID, development usage of SIMs, client ID metadata documents. And at that time, there was no documentation as to what that sort of service was. I've since written a service and I've linked it in various tickets, and I'll also link it in the chat here. But the idea is just that it acts as a mediator for here's some client metadata, here's a stable URL for it.
Thank you. Okay, cool. Moving on. Hi, I'm Aaron Parecki again. This was a picture I took out of the lobby window by the espresso cart. Two drafts to talk about today here, and I think one of them is going to be very quick, and one of them is going to be maybe also quick, but not as quick. So Depop for other things, other kinds of grants. Depop. So hopefully everybody here knows what Depop is. I think you need to give me the clicker again. Great. Depop for the device authorization grant. If you're not familiar with the device authorization grant, that's the one that you often see on smart TVs or the kinds of devices that don't have a either don't have a screen or don't have a browser or don't have a keyboard. So it'll show you a 6-digit code you type in on your phone and log in. Why is this relevant for to Depop? Well, clients that use the device code grant are very likely to be public clients because they are things like a smart TV or things that are deployed in an end user's possession. And one of the very common attack patterns, which has been mentioned in a couple of earlier documents in the group, is that those devices or this flow can be used for large scale token theft or token which eventually get like sold in black marketplaces. Depop alone does not solve that because obviously someone really crafty could also sell the Depop private key they generate. But if you combine Depop with app attestation, and getting back to the first draft, you can actually make a significant dent in this behavior. It is worth noting that this has always been possible. There is nothing stopping anybody from deploying Depop with the device flow. However, it was never actually written down. So I decided to write it down. It's about as simple as you imagine it is. It's basically just saying that the client includes Depop proof when it goes and talks to the device authorization endpoint, so before the user is logged in, as well as on the token endpoint. So technically there is nothing that you can point to that defines the use of Depop at the device authorization endpoint, but there's also nothing stopping you from doing that in the Depop spec. But again, it just wasn't written down previously. So the primary thing this draft is doing is saying that you should do this at the device authorization endpoint, and then also use the key again at the token endpoint when you are polling for the access token. And I think that is that's the last slide for that.
Philip.
Thank you. The beautiful thing about OAuth is our amazing IANA registry of all fancy-dancy parameters that we have. One of those being Depop JKT, which we recognize at the authorization endpoint. And as you said, nothing prevents existing authorization servers from already implementing it, and in fact, some have already done so. But because it wasn't written down, which thanks to this draft we're now going to do, some have taken different routes. So some have taken the route of this draft, the way you define it, that they just pass the Depop proof JOT at the device auth endpoint. Others have chosen the route of just having the Depop JKT be one of the parameters, and then just checking the binding at the token endpoint. So I think if we are writing things down, just like for the authorization code Depop binding, that should be an option because it is already deployed in practice.
That is a very interesting point. I'm not a big fan of adding optionality to things, but if it is really deployed, then, and if it's not a bad idea, then maybe we can do that. Do you want to queue up, something? Brian?
Oh God, I'm leaving.
I don't usually disagree with Philip, but I think the rationale for including Depop JKT at the authorization endpoint through PAR is a little bit different than it would be here. It was already a request parameter possible in authorization request, and so it could already show up as part of a PAR request because it's a request parameter, and PAR, at least in part, was meant to be just a pass-through of the existing request parameters. So I think the conceptual jump to including it in this context is a little bit further, and might be reason to consider not adding that optionality. Though I do sympathize with it already having been done. I'm less a fan of adding it here, and I didn't much care for adding it in at the par endpoint in the first place. It just, you kind of had to. So
Also a very good argument. Okay. I don't want to spend too much more time on this, so unless there's like a, go ahead.
I wouldn't want to either, but it's already there, and if we document it and it does nothing, it's kind of weird. So it's one of the arguments for at least either defining, hey, this is what it does, or hey, this does nothing. Either is fine. We either acknowledge that this has been already deployed somewhere, or we don't. I'm fine either way.
Maybe
Yeah.
discuss this on the list after continue that.
Yeah, it is worth noting this is the first version of the draft the working group has seen, so it is not an adopted draft yet. So maybe the first question is, should we adopt it because people feel like this is worth hashing out? See some ambivalent, yeah. Okay. Thanks for your enthusiasm. Okay, the next draft that I want to talk about is similar, but for a different part of the OAuth flow, which is the JOT authorization grant. So this one's a little bit more complicated because currently the JOT authorization grant defined in 7523 defines the grant type JOT bearer string URN and a way to provide a JOT as a bearer token for as an authorization grant. This document, the 7523, leaves out of scope how that token was obtained. So that makes sense. But what if that token was obtained in a way that was bound to a depop key? Because you can do that, for example, through token exchange. Then what? So that's where we have a gap. Because it doesn't make sense to present a depop bound key as a JOT bearer. You actually probably want to present it as a depop bound JOT. So this document, the new document I have here defines the grant type :JOT depop string as a way to say you are presenting a JOT as an authorization grant that is depop bound. And then again, like you would expect, the depop proof is included in the token request, which is already defined in depop. So that wasn't the gap. The gap was the grant type string. Why is this useful? Why does anybody care? The reason I care about it is for the identity chaining or the identity and assertion authorization grant document that I presented on Monday. This would let us get end-to-end depop binding of the whole thing. So out of scope is how that initial token is obtained, but that would be covered by depop currently if the initial token into the identity chaining draft is an access token. And then token exchange is mostly covered by depop already. If you squint hard enough, it's not that much of a stretch to imagine how to do that, to exchange that initial token for a JOT assertion, which would then be depop bound. And then we need this new grant type in order to take the depop proof from the JOT assertion across domains to the access token request. So this is the current status of the identity assertion authorization grant document. We went over this flow on Monday. In the time since Monday, thanks to Atul's comment, his suggestion was actually, is there any reason that this IDP authorization server has to be the same thing that's issuing the ID JAG token and the ID token? And I've been thinking long and hard about it, and I think the answer is no, there's not necessarily a reason it has to be the same. So this is sitting in a PR in that draft, which again, I'm not talking about this draft, but I'm bringing it here because it's relevant to the depop discussion. What if there's actually two different roles happening that are issuing, one's issuing the SSO token, one's issuing the ID JAG that goes across domains? Those have to have a strong, closely bound trust relationship, which because they're both on the same side of the domain in the identity chaining draft. Anyway, long story short, if we do this, it actually means that for the depop story, we don't need to do anything different for the top version because you can already bind a access token to depop that will be used for SSO. So we don't need to figure out a way to bind a depop proof to an ID token. And then actually the access token is used in the token exchange in step 3 with a depop proof, which is also already covered in depop. instead of trying to figure out how to bind a Depop key to an ID token that would be presented in token exchange. So this, I feel like this cleans up the story quite a bit and enables this flexibility of deployment options where you could split out the thing that's doing user login from the thing that's issuing the cross-domain token. And you can Depop bind it the whole way through now with the addition of this JOT authorization grant. So that's my story, and we have a queue, so we will take questions.
You're on. Yaron, do you have a question?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, it's not a question. I wanted to comment that we support this draft. We have a use case for it. It's slightly different. We wanted to issue with the JOT authorization grant, provide a token to a mobile banking app, but the mobile app is not the JAG issuer. So the JAG is issued by a backend component. We wanted to bind it with Depop to the client against, it is a bearer JOT, it can fall in the wrong hands. And so we wanted to Depop it straight into the JAG and use the same mechanism. So for this problem, reached the same conclusion, and we like this draft because it supports our use case as well.
Thanks. We should definitely chat after. I'd love to learn more about that deployment.
Okay. Philip.
Thank you. The fact that we have JOT bearer and the name of the grant includes the token type that it references is unfortunate. I don't think that spawning a second one which just replaces the token type value is necessarily forward thinking, because if we add another type of binding, we're gonna need another authorization grant. So how about we just drop the token type from the name, just call it JOT. It solves a couple things, because if I'm getting the JOT from a place that I don't know how it was obtained, I'm not the one who obtained it, I don't know whether it's bound with Depop or not. So then I don't know whether I should use whether I should use JOT bearer or JOT Depop. And likewise, if in the case of identity chaining, because the token exchange is not going to give you a token type, it's going to explicitly give you NA, because it's not an access token. You don't know whether it has actually been bound or not, and then you don't know which one of the grant types you should be using.
Are you saying if the client's not sure if the authorization even supports Depop?
Yep, for example.
Or
if the token has actually been bound.
Yeah.
I mean, it can introspect it, it's a JOT, but yeah.
We have too long of a queue for me to respond to all the questions, so I think we should hear the feedback and we can take the discussion.
I'll open an issue about this.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay.
Answering Schuster, we thought about this long in the ID chaining, and there's this sort of situation: what if one domain supports binding, like supports Depop, the other one doesn't? And particularly when you have a ID check that has a CNF claim, and you present it against the JOT bearer, if that authorization server doesn't know about it, it will just issue back an access token without the proof. And this is like your way of escaping a Depop bound token. That's just kind of, I think we should at least have security considerations for these situations. Do I need to go closer?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Thanks. Jeff.
Jeff Lombardo. Just a clarification. On Monday, the ID JAG was an exchange of an ID token for an ID JAG. Here is an access token.
Get closer to the mic.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, thank you.
So, Jeff Lombardo. So on Monday, it was an exchange of an ID token with a potential extension to a refresh token for an ID JAG. Here, it's an access token. Did I miss something?
Yeah, I said it very quickly.
Okay.
So during the Monday session, Atul asked a question, which right at the end, which was, does the issuer of the SSO assertion have to be the same as the issuer of the ID JAG? And I said, I don't know. I'll think about it.
No, this I get. So you want to squeeze it, but here it's like we exchange an access token for an ID JAG.
Yeah, because we don't want to misuse we don't want the thing that's
Oh, that's
issuing the
for
ID
the
jag
audience
to
of the
be
identity tokens that cannot go.
Yeah, exactly. So the audience of the ID token is the IDP, or the client.
Yeah.
And it's really only the client that should be accepting it, or the IDP, because we already do that for token revocation. We don't really want ID tokens to be sent to other things. But however, access tokens can be explicitly audienced to other things.
So ID jag will now evolve to support the 3 type of token.
Yeah, and TBD of whether we keep the ID token option in there for the case where these are the same party. But yes, essentially, yeah. Cool.
Justin, do you have a quick comment about the previous one?
Hi, Justin Richer. I disagree with Philip, and I think that we need to talk more about that because I think
Perfect.
that there's a lot of devils in those details.
Okay, let's take that to the list.
Absolutely.
Okay, perfect.
Okay. Does sound like these have both spurred a significant amount of discussion, so
Yeah.
we will. Yeah.
Perfect.
Okay, great.
That's what we want to do here.
Thank you.
Yaron, I think you have control now. Try
Let's
it.
try it out. Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Let's go.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Yaron Zahavi from Raiffeisen Bank International in Vienna. And I'm going to talk about the browserless app-to-app draft. This is basically OAuth Federation for mobile. And the challenge we are facing, to set the stage, 2017 app-to-web was presented, so OAuth for native apps was possible. This pattern was out there. 2020, Joseph Heenan wrote the blog on app-to-app, which enables an app here on the left side, the relying party, to authenticate with the help of an app on the right side, an authorization server mobile app, which takes over the OAuth calls. So by claiming the URLs on the way into the authenticating app and then using RFC 8252 to claim the redirect URI, you can come back to the app on the right. And that works fine, but within a single trust domain. Our challenge is when there's a federation use case. So between the app, the client app on the left and the authentication authorization server app on the right, there are some authorization servers that need to federate as these validate incoming requests and create their own downstream requests. All this work is done on the browser, which creates a flow that is suboptimal. So there are a number of reasons it might break. It may prompt the user to open deep links. There's more friction. And mainly we have business stakeholders that object. That's what prompted us to look into a more native way to solve this. We have this use case in our group because we are a group of banks. So we want to develop single client apps on the left side for specific vertical use cases, crypto trading, stock trading, gold trading, and deploy them across our 11 subsidiaries in different countries, who all of them have a different main banking, daily banking app on the right side. And so to do that, we need a broker. And then that broker is handled on the browser. That's our problem. Recently, we were contacted by the Swiss government, and they have a use case where applications on the left side need to consume authenticating apps on the right side. So AGOV is the EID app. FedLogin is an application that handles government employees, and there are also private sector apps that can do this. And they have a broker in the middle, and then that creates this federation problem as well. They're looking for a smoother solution. And so this brings us to our draft, and to present it in give a bit more context to those who have not had the chance to take a look at it. We're basically talking about the client app acting as its own user agent without the help of the browser. And this relies on a native authorization endpoint. This is a proposal from Joseph Heenan at the previous IETF, which is basically OAuth 2 as a RESTful API. So it returns application JSON as content type. It does not redirect. There's no bot detection challenges in front of it, no captchas. But in all other aspects, it's interoperable with all other RFCs. It accepts one special parameter, a native callback URI, which is a registered redirect URI of the client, and it passes it on downstream. And so then when the client app calls it, it has a number of responses it can give back. It can give a federating response. That's what the brokers are going to do. It's going to say, okay, you need to call, and here's the next OAuth request. This is the equivalent of a 302 that we all know, but just in a way that is easier to process from a native client. It might say, if it's the last in the link and has an app, it might say, oh, now you've reached the app, so deep link to the app if it's there on the device. So you've reached the user authenticating app. And it might say, in some cases, I need more guidance to route. So what you have here is a chooser of a bank. Choose your bank. So there is some information here. Just give me a choice. Tell me which bank you're going to so that I can direct the flow. Or, for example, give me an input of an email address. So if you give me an email, I'll know the domain, I'll know the next authorization server I need to redirect to. So 3 types of responses can be provided here. And basically, the client traverses those responses and goes along the chain, calls those until it reaches the target app. That's the app that can actually authenticate the user. This one's called via deep link, validates the request, authenticates the user, authorizes all normal stuff, prepares the response to redirect URI, and then the special stuff. Instead of calling the redirect URI, it invokes this native callback URI because the redirect URI is not claimed on the device. That's going to take us again to the browser. So the native callback URI is the way to go back to the client app. Of course, this needs to be trusted, either through an allow list, like in a closed ecosystem use case, or through OpenID Federation client metadata. So there's the way to traverse the tree and say, aha, within my trust tree, within my ecosystem, someone trusts this client, and this is a registered redirect URI. So that's also an option. And then the client app calls this redirect URI natively and all subsequent URLs, which basically takes it, it unfurls this loop of calls that it did before that. So basically, it goes through those redirect URIs until it reaches its own. So it's back home, it gets code or a JARM response and can finish the protocol and obtain tokens. We've had feedback since the last IETF, so thank you to those who provided feedback. One of the problems was, how do we bind this response to a user agent? This was raised by George Fletcher. So imagine that the client has called some middle of the chain AS n-1, and this one says, call n-2, here's the code and state. So as it's calling n-2, the state needs to be bound to something binding it to the user agent, like a PXE code verifier. How will n-2 know to take it? How do we mitigate authorization code theft and replay by an unauthorized actors? In normal OAuth, we use cookies for that. And initially, we took cookies out, but with this comment, we put cookies back in. So it works, but it just feels a bit less natural for REST. So we're open to find a better way if someone can think of a better mechanism that solves the security requirements. In addition, so George provided feedback, Arndt Schwenkschuster, Philips Koken, so thank you to all of you. PXE was recommended, but the reviewer said, let's make it mandatory here in this case. I accepted that. Philip said, why don't you use PAR and hand down requests that are the intermediary brokers can create their requests on their own and not hand out entire URLs, then you're less susceptible to leakage and manipulation of the request. So that went into the next draft. There's a question about this routing response privacy. It's a bit unnatural that you would provide input with sensitive details not to your trusted environment. Although we on the web, when we log into somewhere, pops up a screen that says, give me your email. Microsoft Office 365 does this, for example, and we do it without a problem. So we put language into the draft to avoid sensitive details put here, but we're not sure if this requires more guidance on this. So this is open to more feedback. And we're basically asking for additional review because we have active use cases for this, both in our case and the Swiss government is interested in this. We'd like to ask in the next IETF for the work group adoption. So we'd like to ask anyone interested in this work, anyone with relevant mobile native use cases and federations ecosystems to provide initial feedback. we hope that this is interesting and relevant beyond the German-speaking world. That's it.
Thanks, Aaron. Any comments, questions? Roberta.
Hi, Aaron. Thank you for the presentation. I have a question because had a few issues already with, native browsers being used for banking applications, even when they were native. Have you seen like the sandboxing side of the native browser usage for the deep links? Was that an angle that maybe I might be able to collaborate and help with about like taking this as a tooling to try to stealing the information through the call, right, through the deep link. Was that considered?
So if you got the question right, you're talking about not providing the wrong client with sensitive information. Yeah, so that's absolutely considered. You'll see it in the security considerations. So unlike, so RFC 8252 had language about not rendering OAuth web in a web view. So to avoid keystroke recording, etc. So we mentioned that in the draft and taken, we consider that security consideration as well. The aim is to go to the rightful app where you're supposed to authenticate, just not to drop on the browser. And the only caveat is in use cases where you need some input to guide. So imagine I need to know which bank you're going to, or that bank needs to know if you're retail or corporate. So we're restricted to very non-sensitive input.
Awesome, thank you.
Okay, any other comments, questions?
Hi, Aaron Parecki. Have you seen the first party apps draft? I don't remember if that was something
we have.
Does that?
We have.
It looks like a similar thing of providing a JSON API, JSON-based API to do the challenge and response that gives you a lot of extension points. I do recognize it doesn't define all of the things that you have in here, but it was meant to be a framework for doing this kind of thing. Did you feel like it didn't address the needs you have?
Yeah, we took a good look at that, but this is not a first party scenario. So what we have here is that the domains that are involved are totally different. I have it here. So the client app does not have a direct relationship with the authenticating apps on the right side, for example. So it cannot serve challenges. It should not have this information. So mostly we see on the apps on the right side some security package like OneSpan, Vultr Security, etc. And they're going to do native, like they're going to create a digital signature with keys stored on that device. So those are not challenges that we want to serve to the app on the left side. So it doesn't have a first party relationship even with those apps. It uses a broker, and that broker consumes the next IDP in line.
Yeah, okay.
But
no, I get that.
If you could take a look and say if we could have used something, happy for that feedback. If we missed something,
I'll take a look
in your
because I feel like, yeah, and this was one of the challenges with defining the scope of that draft as well. And one of the reasons we put the name first party in it is because it is designed to present direct challenges and collect direct credential input from the user, like WebAuthn keys and stuff. So, but the broader pattern of the client sends a request and gets something back and does something different, or asks for an email address, for example, that's all stuff that you can also do with the draft. So there's no, you could deploy it without ever asking for anything that is sensitive from a user. So
right.
But I agree that the name and the examples and that would not have led you to that conclusion. So so it sounds like I need to take a look at this.
Happy to talk about it.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Okay, thanks, Paul. Sorry, thanks, Aaron. Paul.
Yeah, in OpenID for VCI, we had a very similar trajectory, and we had a very close look at first-party app as well, and then decided similarly to you that it kind of doesn't fit, even like from the name, because in our scenario, the wallet wants to authenticate at the authorization server of an issuer. So I think that may have a lot of similarities. Did you look at what OpenID for VCI is designing at the interactive authorization endpoint?
Okay, thank you. I'll take a look at it.
If you have a comment. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
a quick one. I was trying to get in the queue, but I forgot
that's
this.
fine.
So, Leif Johansson, there is, I mean, for the specific question of the discovery type flows, you might worth taking a look at the Seamless Access project. We did a lot of stuff related to discovery. Now that's in the SAML context, but I think you could glean a lot of learnings from that. Especially when it comes to handling of sensitive information related to discovery.
Which project was that? Could you say again? I missed that.
Seamless access, one word.
Seamless access.
Can you send it? Yeah, a link. That'll be great. Okay, thanks. Okay. Thanks, Aaron.
Thank you.
All right. Hello, everyone. Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm Nick Watson. I'm from Google. I regret not having a photo here, but I do have the Quebecois flag as a consolation prize. All right. So actually, I'm going to say here that maybe the first thing you'll notice is that from Madrid is I've dropped the word consent, which should make a number of people in this room very happy, I think. So we have sort of two concepts here. So there's what I'm now calling authorization expiration, which is related to how long the client will have access to the resource owner's data through APIs. So for example, a user could select 30-day access, and then there's credential expiration, which refers to the actual refresh token itself and how long it can be used for. So why does this matter? Why don't clients just have to deal with stuff, and why do they want to know? So for authorization expiration, clients might want to remind the user that it's expiring so they can do something out of band, or even when they're back in the loop, because you can get disruption of service if authorization expires kind of randomly. You can imagine things like trip tracking apps that are running in the background, looking at your email, organizing stuff. And then credential expiration, clients need to know how often that refresh token must be used. I have also removed references here to rotation. It is not the only way that this might come up. Some refresh tokens just have to be used in order to be kept alive. Okay, so there's another draft up, or version of one. So I've mentioned the first one already. So there's also some clarification that was added about what authorization means in relation to scopes, because you might have multiple refresh tokens flying around that have access to the same scopes. And then, as I've also already mentioned, rotation of refresh tokens is sort of moved to an informative section. It's just kind of related. It could be a possible reason you might want to include some of these values, but it's not the exact cause. And then some more considerations of what I would expect clients might want to do with this information were added as well to non-normative sections, including things like if you wanted to use prompt equals consent from OIDC, if you're a client that now knows that you need to get the user back in the loop to do some authorization, that's a possibility. So I should have put this on the last slide. I've renamed them the fields as well, reflecting some feedback from last time. So refresh token timeout and authorization expires in. So refresh token timeout being basically how long you can keep the refresh token without exchanging it. And then authorization expires in, which is how long the client actually has access to this data. Okay, so that was pretty quick. I'm also trying to save you some time. Also, I think I only needed 10 minutes, but I appreciate the 15. We'll see how long people talk. So yeah, I would very much like a reviewer or many. And then at some point after that, a question of adoption.
Okay, awesome. George.
Yeah, just real quick. It feels like the authorization expires in is a one-to-many relationship with the refresh token. In other words, the refresh token could represent multiple authorizations, in which case you would need to have multiple instances of the authorization expires in and somehow bind them to which authorization is going to expire when. I don't think these things are necessarily one-to-one. Yeah, that's the only comment.
Yeah, in some, I guess, so in some deployments, you could definitely imagine ending up in a situation where, say, 4 scopes are authorized all for a different amount of time. And this could definitely, like, that could get out of control quickly, like this. So it would probably be good to add some language to sort of say maybe what you might expect an authorization server to do in that situation. For example, by returning the minimum value.
Okay, Aaron.
Hi, Aaron Parecki. I think these are all great changes. Makes a ton of sense. I like the concept behind this draft. I think it's a useful mechanism, and I think we should do an adoption call. I think we've talked about it in the unadopted state for long enough.
Justin Richer. Yeah, I think on the surface, this is pretty simple. It lines up pretty well. It does, however, point a bright light at one of the things in OAuth that is probably even less defined than client ID, and that is the lifetime and arity relationship between all of the artifacts, including the grant, the authorization, the refresh token, the access token, and all of this other stuff. OpenID Foundation took a very noble swing at this with the grant management API thing. There was an attempt. Needless to say, like this spirals out very, very quickly beyond just when is my refresh token going to expire if you're going to have the client actually do something smart. And the final point is that by and large, OAuth clients are not smart. They just keep using tokens until the token stops working, and then they go use a different token until that stops working, and then they go, I guess I just reset and ask the user again. That's worked pretty well. I question whether there's really like need for additional stuff. I know some people will tell me that yes, there are smarter clients that do things. Aaron's nodding at me. But yeah, in my experience, by and large, OAuth client software is super dumb, and that's on purpose. So this feels like adding a lot of complexity for a very, very small gain.
I was with you with the OAuth clients are dumb until you said on purpose. I think
architecturally on purpose, to be clear.
I mean, yeah, for us, I would fully expect if this was implemented that, I don't know, 90+% wouldn't do anything with it. This is more responding to feedback we've gotten from big partners. For example, like Google has recently started limiting Gmail access to a certain amount of time. And like some of the immediate feedback we got is because of a lot of these are like offline type things where people are like, oh no, all my users are getting disconnected. They don't know what to do, etc. So, I mean, that is some of the case of this. Mm-hmm. I think definitely it is a good point that like we don't want to overcomplicate things. I mean, going back to what George was saying about different scopes and things, like I would be open to writing something that does like per scope authorization expires, but that sounds like a mess that I don't want to untangle. And I would say like just pick a sane default, take the minimum. Yes, you're going to be overly conservative in some cases, and users will have to do stuff. But oh well.
Yeah, I think if there's clear guidance about what the expectations are, that's viable. But yeah.
Okay.
Okay, Paul.
Yeah, I think the refresh token expiration is a valid scenario that I think is significant to communicate to users, because user authentication may require certain resources that the users don't have in the daily life. I don't quite understand yet why there is two different things for authorization and for the refresh token, and why does a refresh token time out instead of expires?
So, I mean, the two different things is really more of like who ultimately is responsible for that deadline or the timeout. Like the authorization expires and would be something that is controlled either by the user or an admin or something, whereas the refresh token timeout is probably more going to be authorization server policy. I mean, I've left it maybe a little bit open-ended because there are different use cases where, say, you might just have like a keep alive where the refresh token comes back and then it just gets updated like, yeah, okay, you can keep using this for another 6 months, and unused tokens will get cleaned up. Or it could be related to rotation, for example. You must rotate it every so often. So that's why they're different fields, because they can and do very differently.
Okay, thanks, Paul. Aaron.
Hi, Aaron Perecki. So I want to Justin's point about OAuth clients are intentionally stupid. I think that is actually really important, and it is actually a good design feature of most of the OAuth protocol that it works that way. And for that reason, like I don't want to like try to boil the ocean and solve all of the like how do tokens and authorizations relate to all the, describe the whole chain, because that doesn't solve the problem. It doesn't really solve any problem, and it doesn't let clients keep being dumb. This draft, I think, like what you've done with the minimal definitions of these properties does continue to let the OAuth clients be dumb in the appropriate way. And I don't want to go further than that, right? So like you have a very concrete use for why you want the client to know about these, and it gives it the opportunity to do something slightly better than if it were not aware of it. And that's a good level to shoot for. But so I would not want to complicate this anymore.
On Frank Schuster, I think like +1 of what Aaron said, right? Like we don't want to overly complicate clients, like that will just go the wrong way. And I support this work because it allows the clients that want to be smart to give a better user experience, right? And that is something that we should definitely strive for.
Thanks.
Brian.
Brian Newbold. I just wanted to, I haven't actually dug into this. I'll have to think about it a little more, and I'll try to give some feedback on the mailing list. I wanted to give one kind of like motivating use case where, the existing OAuth ecosystems, primarily like your client's only talking to a couple different providers, and there might be some norms, and you can kind of assume, you might know that you're probably going to get a couple weeks or something like that. In a more like kind of federated ecosystem, like different, your client software, which you might ship as an open source thing, might be talking to lots of other different instances that have like wildly different token lifetimes, and being able to, it becomes a little more salient to know like what you're going to do. And some use cases around that might be something like scheduled posting. Like if you know you're going to want to take an action in a week, for your client, if you're being given a token that doesn't even last that long, you'd want to know that and be able to surface that earlier on to end users.
Okay, thanks, Brian. It seems to me like that there are a few more things that we want to iron out, maybe, and maybe if we can get a few people to review the document and try to make a call for adoption next time. Brian, you want to chime in?
Sorry, I did actually review it right before this.
Okay.
I told you that I'd do that 3 months ago, and I just finally got to it. But you pulled back and clarified a lot of things that I was worried about in the last draft. So I want to throw that out there as,
okay,
I guess,
fair. Okay.
More near-term support.
Okay. Justin, you had some reservation. Like, do you think would you be against calling for adoption right now? Or
Dude, I'm not in charge.
I want to get your opinion. You're not going to make a decision.
No, so I think that if this is kept scoped and simple, it can make a lot of sense. I think that there are deeper existential questions that we as the OAuth community need to ask ourselves, including what is the relationship between all of these things and what do we even expect that to be? Aaron can put all that into one and it'll be fine. But I don't think, that wasn't me saying that I think this draft needs to define all of that, but I think it needs to be eyes open about that. All of these are things that can be very easily addressed during working group process. It's not necessary prior to an adoption call. I have not read the latest draft, but as you described it, it seems pretty simple. And if it can effectively scope itself to say, this is what this is meant to mean, and not spiral out into all of the other places that it very quickly could go, then I think that it's a reasonable addition.
Okay, thanks, Justin, for the clarification. Anybody against calling for adoption in a week or two? No, I'm just getting like people to come to the mic and complain or whatever. Right? Either way, official will be on the mailing list, so it's not gonna do anything here. Okay, I don't see anybody jumping on the mic here, so we'll make a call for adoption on the mailing list in a week or two. Okay.
Cool. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you. Yaroslav.
All right. Hello, everybody. So today, Lauren and I would. Oh, right. Keep forgetting. Okay. Hello, everybody. Today, Lauren and I would like to present separating depot bindings for access and refresh token proposal. So this is something that we've been working for a little while, and this is designed to solve a practical security problem that we have encountered. So Laurent will introduce the problem space, and then later I will take over and discuss a potential solution that we have designed, and we are very interested in hearing your opinions on that.
Maybe introduce yourself, Lauren, because this is your first time, and if you want to adjust the mic too, you can adjust it.
Right, yeah, so I'm Lauren Weath. I work also at Zscaler with Yaroslav. So I was looking at the situation where there were a lot of these sort of bearer tokens floating around after this compromise that you know, one carrier, one company had some tokens, and then people used those tokens to get more tokens, and the big token palooza. And so it makes it a little scary if you're a company that uses other people's tokens to access things. So the idea is I don't do this much.
That's fine. Take your time. You want to go back to a previous slide?
Let's see here. So essentially, we do cloud. We are a cloud provider that uses other people's tokens to scan files and things like that from other providers, among many other things that they do. So the question is, what happens if somebody gets a hold of those tokens And Depop is one of the very nice things that kind of ties that to, one particular user of a token, or one system that uses the tokens, which was super exciting when I saw it. And then I found out, well, Depop has a very good feature that when you have a token that is bound by Depop, any token that's derived from it is going to be also bound by the same key. So if you have, for example, you have a system that maintains a lot of refresh tokens, then you want to be able to kill them quickly. But OAuth doesn't seem to have a lot of features that allow you to just say, please, God, take this token. I don't want it anymore. If it gets compromised. So unless you're the customer, unless you're the actual user. So these are other people's tokens. We don't know what their usernames and passwords and things are. So in my understanding may be limited on, is almost certainly limited on this. So I saw Depop as a way to make it so that you tie your Depop key into an HSM, you cut off the HSM if you have a problem, no more, the access tokens are going to kind of burn themselves out, and the refresh tokens will not be exercisable anymore. The hitch is, of course, that if you have a refresh token with a key and that key is in an HSM, then all of the access tokens that come from that are also going to be tied to a key that's in the same HSM, and HSMs are kind of expensive, so you have this scaling problem if you do that. So the idea is that we kind of track the refresh tokens, Depop, more separately from the access tokens, so that you can have the sort of the core system that handles the keys, and then you have your edge workloads that go and do the scanning and poking around inside other people's systems. So I think that pretty much does it. So essentially, this is about trying to find a way to contain leaked refresh tokens and still be able to maintain a system that's going to run efficiently at scale. So I believe there was a mention on the list that there's another way that you could do this. So you could use, for example, a different kind of proof of possession, like, for example, MTLS, or you could use JWKS, or something of that nature. Those things kind of boil down to, if you're being attacked really hard, then that boils down to something like, the thing that protects JWKS is going to be the normal public PKI and the revocation and stuff like that. So if the key for the JWKS distribution server, or whatever that is, the endpoint, if that certificate gets compromised, that's a problem. Of course, you can store that in an HSM. That's no problem. But then you may get a illicitly issued token, or somebody might get a hold of a machine and get a certificate, or illicitly issued certificate. So somebody may get a hold of the certificate, and it takes a while to revoke those. So I think the differentiation between Depop and some of these other things is, well, we covered that. Revocation is kind of speed. So if you use Depop RT, then you can very quickly just cut the legs off of your refresh tokens by cutting off the HSM, and you retain the performance. And with the JWKS and MTLS based ones and the secret based ones, they're either you have to do them initially, you have to set them up special, or they have a little bit longer time to be able to disable them. Like if you need to disable a certificate, it might take days before somebody notices because of the caching of CRLs and that sort of thing. That is the basic idea. Just
Thank you. So as Lauren mentioned, DPOPs have a number of nice properties that we would like to leverage not only for access tokens in case of confidential clients, but also for refresh tokens, and also separate for non-confidential clients DPOP for access token and refresh tokens. Our idea is to introduce a new DPOP RT. RT stands for refresh token. That would be very, very similar to DPOP, except that it has a different type and it has a hash of refresh token rather than access token. So all the mechanics that we've developed and perfected over the years with DPOPs very much apply here. The same optional nonce mechanism applies. So the flow would be client is doing initial authorization on the server with both DPOP and DPOP RT. If client and server support that, then server produces access token that would be bound to DPOP and refresh token that would be bound to DPOP RT instead. Client is doing access with access token and regular DPOP, and then when time comes to refresh the token, client would use refresh token with DPOP RT and use new potentially DPOP to bind new access token to. So we are minimizing blast radius of potential compromise, and we're also very importantly introducing a potential for client to have a separate DPOP RT for each and every refresh token. Traditional confidential clients typically rely on the same set of credentials for all the refresh tokens that they have in possession, meaning that blast radius of compromise in case of multi-tenant systems can be quite devastating, as unfortunately we have seen a few times in practice. So again, the outcome is that in this environment, in this distributed environment where you have edge workloads that manage access tokens, they only have access to DPOPs that are associated with those access tokens, and kind of the core workload that has the luxury of having an HSM would have refresh tokens and also DPOPs that would have their private keys located on HSMs. So any initial thoughts, feedback, suggestions, that would be very welcome. Arndt.
Yeah, one question. Can you go to the previous slide, please? My understanding is that in order to get an access token, you need to provide the established DPOP resource RT and the new DPOP, like for the to bind the access token. That means the core workload needs to have access to the key of the edge workload?
Yes, you do need both, of course, in order to get a in order to produce new DPOP for new access token, you need to provide new DPOP. Yes, so you would. Internal APIs are obviously very intimate details of this cloud. So it's either edge workload asks core workload to sign using a private key or other way around. So I would say that this is an implementation detail, but yeah, that's a very good question.
Yeah, and I think it's fair to have it as an implementation detail. In general, I think this is particularly for smart workloads, as we had it before, relevant. But I don't want to overload this to the dumb ones. So as long as this is optional, I think this is a good thing to have.
Thank you, Arndt.
Joseph.
Hey everyone, Joseph. I think
Joseph, we can't hear you.
Oh, really?
We can hear you, but faint, like me.
Oh, okay, right. Is that okay?
No.
Is it possibly the wrong microphone?
Okay, give me a minute. Go on to Brian. I'll come
Okay, I'll let Brian speak, and then you fix it there. Brian.
Hello, Yaroslav. We talked about this a little bit earlier, so it'll come as no surprise that the original DPOP stuff was very, very intentional about not providing this. as a means of trying to reduce complexity of the overall solution and make it something that's reasonably deployable. And the caveat or the piece of that that we thought made it reasonable was that in confidential client use cases, the refresh token is bound to the client and its associated authentication, which, as far as I can tell, without saying things like minimizing the blast radius, which without endorsing statements like that I think are kind of empty rhetoric that you can say to just sort of say, oh, let's minimize blast radius. Like, it's very much designed to bind a refresh token to a client that has access to a TPM or an HSM and give the facilities to protect that key in a really strong way and revoke access to it and to lock down that. And the case where you don't, where you only get one thing bound, and when you bound the refresh token, sorry, is public clients, which are like phones and other devices. And there's an argument that there should be some more flexibility there, but the thinking was that binding to that key is better because there's nothing else to bind to on a public client. And it's, I think, different than the use case you have here. So I worry about introducing these kinds of additional extensions and functionality in a way that complicates the world towards a use case that I'm not convinced isn't already addressed by other functionality existing in the specification.
Right, that's very fair, especially the remark about blast radius, sorry.
Except it does.
One thing that I would say that in practice, sender constraints, in my experience, they are the same constraints for all the refresh tokens that you might have in possession. So if your credential is compromised, then it compromises all the refresh tokens that you happen to have. And unfortunately, quite often we have seen that confidential client authentication is rather poor, such as static secret that is being sent, and that's confidential according to definition, but it's obviously very poor level of confidentiality. So DPoPs have, again, very nice property that it's public-private key pair, and you have lower potential level that you can fall. You have certain guarantees that DPoPs provide that we would like to inherit.
But there are public-private key client authentication mechanisms that it might be better to push the cases that need them in that direction,
right,
rather than doing this to something that doesn't need
okay
it, in my opinion.
Okay, let's
fair enough.
Let's give Joseph a chance. Joseph. No, same thing, Joseph. Please send the message to the list, Joseph. Thank you.
Switch microphones.
Yeah, he tried.
We're out of time.
He tried.
We're out
Yeah.
of time.
Okay.
Okay.
Anything else?
Nope.
You're gonna say something there? You're good.
I think the only thing I was going to mention was that the public-private key solutions, I had looked at them, and I think the main difference between this and those is that almost all of those appear to be backed by PKI, and PKI is not quite as nimble. If you have already associated a specific public-private key, then you can kill that thing off fast. But then JWKS has an underlying.
Yeah, there's one variant of them all that is based on a PKI, but the rest are really just like raw key mechanisms. So, like, to the extent that that's the rationale for introducing something new, then we need to go ahead and like step back and make sure that that's understood as not true before we try to solve the problem that's not there. Sorry, I don't know how to say it. Like,
okay,
it's not the case. So
okay,
we need to like step back a little bit before we jump forward.
Okay, thank you. Thank you all. Thanks. Go ahead.
So I'll try to make this as quick as possible. This is me, Ansheng Schuster. On behalf of my other co-authors, Stein Turgeson, Scott Rose, and Peter Kasselman, I'm presenting OAuth SPIFFE client authentication. Yeah, so SPIFFE stands for Secure Production Identity Framework for Everyone. There's some details about it. I've talked about this at the previous IETF, so I'm not gonna go over it. Yeah, so the current situation is that workloads in their workload environment can use SPIFFE to talk to other workloads. This is like, for example, in a service mesh, in a confined environment, a trust domain, workloads use SPIFFE to authenticate to each other. The problem starts when workloads also need to authenticate clients. And for this, OAuth is a well-established ecosystem, and we want to use it, right? There's no way to, like, that it wouldn't make sense to bring user auth directly into SPIFFE because there's already OAuth that really does this well. And in order for a workload to actually do OAuth, it needs to authenticate to the authorization server. And the most common way to do this as of today is client ID and secret. There are some ways to do like a key thing and sign some self-signed assertion, but it also means that the workload needs to manage this key on top of the SPIFFE credential it has today. So manual provisioning, it's long-lived, it's often a bearer credential and so on, while the workload has these nice things like automatic provisioning, short-lived credentials, proof of key possession, available within its other environment, talking to other workloads. Yeah, so this is how it often looks like. There's like a Java Spring configuration and a .NET configuration. You often see these client secrets running around. Some people put in vaults, but problem is the same. So the goal where we want to get to is that workloads can use their workload identity, their SPIFFE SWIT, to actually authenticate to authorization servers and get rid of that long-lived credential or that key management workloads need to rotate, basically worry-free OAuth client authentication. Yeah, so the proposal is that we're going to use existing drafts. There is 7.521, which is the assertion framework, which we could use for the short SWIT, which is a token. And there's RFC 8705, which is the mutual JS client authentication, which we can use for the X509 version of it. SPIFFE has its own way to distribute keys and make them available. So there's this SPIFFE bundle endpoint that also uses JOCs. Yeah, and all of this together, we want to kind of, we've written together to kind of say, this is how you do client authentication with SPIFFE. Yeah, so vanilla 7.523 or 8705 don't work for us because they do require that the client ID and the assertion subject are the same. So 7.523 says, for client authentication, the subject must be the client ID of the OAuth client. And that's a problem because it would literally mean all the clients that are created or like done this way have a SPIFFE identifier. There's the key discovery I said before. SPIFFE has its own way to do key discovery, and there's also very specific security considerations that apply to this. And this kind of justifies, at least for the authors, that this is specific work. Yeah, so this the timeline we had before. We had an interim in between last IETF 123 and 124. It's a 1 hour long talk about this. There's a demo in it. So if you're interested, watch it. But yeah, this has now been talked about for approximately 1 year. So the question is the OAuth working group the correct venue for it? There's been previous asks about whether this should be done in SPIFFE instead. I believe yes, because if all of those different frameworks have all their own venues, it's going to be very difficult to get the expert into all of those venues. And yeah, everything will just diverge from everything. And then there's this whole discussion about the SPIFFE ID versus the client ID. I personally believe we want to break open this must that was there before, at least in this profile. And eventually, I would like to know if there's interest in the working group to pursue this work. Perfect. We have 5 minutes.
Thoughts, comments? Fleming.
Fleming Andreas, and yeah, I mean, I like this work. I think it makes sense. We have an infrastructure, as you've outlined, that already does all the credential management for us. I think taking advantage of that is a good idea. I would like to see a little bit more, perhaps, in the draft in terms of some of the security considerations, specifically related to the JOT SVITs. I think some recommendations around how do we do that in a more secure manner would be helpful. And you kind of alluded to the WMC identity tokens in there as well. In your presentation, I didn't see those in the draft, so I guess that would just be a question as to, is that something that perhaps should or should not be in scope? But regardless, I think this makes sense. Yep.
Yeah. The WMC identity tokens are just to be added into SPIFFE, so there's like kind of a chicken egg problem, but it definitely needs to be in there too. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
Jeff Lombardo. Yeah. So same thing, supporting the proposal over here. We are currently doing some works around that also. I think having more high assurance client authentication mechanism is better for the ecosystem. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Justin Richer, this makes about as much sense as every single other thing we're cramming into client ID. So sure. I do worry that we're cramming a lot of very different and incompatible things into client ID, importantly with different semantics and different expectations of behavior around them. So I think that that's something that we, as you mentioned, we need to be very clear about, how we differentiate. Thankfully, if we do bring this into the working group, the major piece of work that this might step on, the metadata doc, is still in progress. So we can make sure that they, when you see this kind of thing, do this. When you see that kind of thing, do that, is spelled out very appropriately. I wanted to second the question about WITs and WMC identifiers and stuff like that. Obviously you're involved in both groups. I would really love to see this not just be SPIFFE, if that's a thing that makes sense. And is it your intent to take a direct dependency on WMC, or just mention it? Or
in all fairness, it was my intent to edit in the first place, but I didn't want to overcomplicate it. So I took it out until someone asks for it, and then I'm going to edit back in. So
that is fair.
Yeah, just to keep things simple in the beginning, focus on the problem space. And then once we decide to work on the problem space, we can then.
Oh, so that's when you start blowing up the scope. Got it. All right. Thanks, Arn.
Yeah.
To be fair, there is client ID is mentioned on here, but I don't think this draft really is about cramming things into the client ID. It's more about like how to associate them and accommodate them with the client assertion and authentication. So I don't think it touches on your pain as much as it sounded like there, Justin, but maybe. And I forgot what I was going to say. Oh, about OAuth being the right venue for this. I know we've had this and a lot of other drafts that are like something a little bit tangential using OAuth. Is this the right place? Is somewhere else the right place? In the context of something like this, which is really about how an OAuth thingy would consume a construct maybe from outside of its world, I do think this is probably the right place to bring it, in contrast to what I said about the Depop mock stuff earlier in the week, where that's really almost all of that is happening outside of the OAuth context. So it's always a tough question, but I feel like it would be appropriate here.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, thanks. Peter, do you have a quick comment about this, or you good?
The only comment is with respect to the client ID metadata piece. I do think there is an opportunity for us to figure out how to get that registration elegance coupled with the authentication elegance of having all of these things already deployed. And I think that could be a good thing for us to figure out here.
Okay. So it seems that I get the feeling that there is interest here, and people are willing to work on this, and a call for adoption. Anybody has any problem with calling for adoption for this document? I think we've discussed this a few times already. Don't see anybody jumping in the queue. Okay, we'll call for adoption.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, transaction tokens. I'm going to skip because I'm pressed for time. I'm going to skip the first slide because I think most people know what transaction tokens are. They're a way of, extending the authorization and context to downstream services within a trust domain. And there's a couple of implementations now. One is, of course, a CNCF sandbox project, and the other one is Keycloak. And we've made a lot of progress since 123. We did a working group last call. There was a lot of feedback, great feedback. A lot of it was editorial, but there were some important things like the name of the field called purpose is now scope because it closely aligns with what scope is used in general. There's the type discussion and added a flow diagram for how the internal token flow works and language improvements. The things that I wanted to discuss today was there's a question about whether the request context should be validated, and I think in the current draft we are not actually requiring anyone to specify. There's no language around how the request context is validated, and so I would like to keep it that way because I think the requester can send whatever it wants. It's up to the transaction token service to determine what it should include into the transaction token. So if there's something wrong with the request or request context, then it can always ignore it or reject the request and so on. So I don't think there should be anything in the draft as far as request context validation is concerned. And we can take questions at the end, so I'll just go through the rest of it. For the replacement flow, I think there was a first question whether this should exist, and I had a discussion with Brian earlier today where we kind of didn't know about the answer until we have George involved. I think George, if you're online, you can provide an opinion there. The other two, whether a replacement transaction token can extend the lifetime of the existing token. I think there are some broader things that people want to do with transaction tokens that might require the lifetime to be extended. So I would like the draft to not say that it cannot be extended, so that it currently says that, and I would like it to be possible to extend it, but that's something that we can discuss. And then can the transaction context be modified in a replacement? And I think it should absolutely be possible to modify it, because that's one of the reasons you would want a replacement transaction token, is because a downstream service doesn't quite understand the same parameters as an upstream service, and you want to replace it the context with some more details or some other way of stating things. So I think because the transaction token service is the one that is issuing the transaction token as well as the replacement, it should be possible for the service to change the transaction context. So those are the few things that we wanted to talk about today. Any questions?
Yeah, Anshang Schuster. I've never been such a fan of the replacement process. And we're just seeing this whole topic evolve and see market adoption and deployment. So I would kind of question if it doesn't make sense to just remove it out of the draft and do a second draft or like something separate later on when we get like actual deployment and get the experience from it. It seems like there's a lot of caveat to the replacement that we may want to take experience in first.
Right. Peter or George, do you want to comment on this?
And I think it's good, useful feedback, and we can consider it. I don't know that I have a strong feeling one way or the other.
One observation, I think we can remove it. I think people will probably do replacement transaction tokens anyway. Then they will do it without any guidance, and we should decide if we want to clean up later or if we want to give some guidance up front.
Right. I think I kind of like Arndt's idea of like separating out into a different draft, so that that can be you can still give the guidance, just not as a part of this draft. Does that? Yeah.
Just
Let the record show that Peter shrugged. Justin Richards. So I think that this might be running into semantics that it really doesn't need to by calling it a replacement or an extension or something like that. Really, transaction tokens are by design immutable. And what you're really talking about here is creating a new transaction token in the context of an existing transaction. And I could be doing that for a whole variety of different reasons. Most likely, I'm trying to get a new view of an existing transaction or something like that. But just like how token exchange basically says, you chuck in a token, you get out a different token, and there's all the metadata about it. This really ought to be doing the same thing. Sure, have some guidance that if you are generating a new transaction token in the context of an existing transaction token, here's some things to consider. Great, but that's not really a new process. That's just an input, a particularly semantically relevant input to the transaction token generation process. And I don't think we really ought to go beyond that.
Right. I think the only thing is that we have to track the requesting workload of the original transaction token and the replacement transaction token.
Sometimes.
Okay.
Go ahead, Peter.
I can see that this can even just be security considerations, right? If you're doing this, here are some things you might want to consider. That's and a good way. That way, I think Justin's point about, we're introducing a semantic is confusing. We're overthinking. I think do it as a security consideration. And let the record show that Brian agreed. His thumb was in the air.
Okay, Peter.
Hi, Peter Liu. So I wonder, because the transaction context is usually the original context to be preserved throughout the request, I wonder, can you give a more specific example, like what kind of situation would require the transaction context be modified?
Right. So, for example, let's say you have a intermediate service that does a fraud analysis of the user and decides that the user is not fraudulent, and you want to add that to the transaction context. You can do that in the replacement transaction tokens.
Yeah, right. So recently we're trying to use transaction tokens in some kind of use cases where, transaction context we think could be best not modified, throughout a request call, because we're thinking about, using transaction tokens to carry agent-to-agent calls, and there's a context rot problem because agent would change the context arbitrarily, but we want to keep the original context of the request to be mutable throughout the process. So it would, in some cases, I would not say that a transaction context cannot be modified at all time, but we should be a little bit giving some options. Like in some cases, we can prevent them to be changed. In some cases, you want to be more explicit.
We're running out of time here.
Oh, sorry.
So, okay. Thanks, Peter.
All right.
Let's take it to the list, right?
Yeah.
Peter, quick comment.
Yeah. Similar. Maybe it's another thing that can be specified in security considerations about when is it appropriate or inappropriate. Yeah. Sounds good.
Okay. Jeff, do you want to come here?
Very quick, Jeff Lombardo. There is a fourth for the replacement of threads. There is a fourth use cases, which is the cross-security domains. You might want to replace a threads by a threads for another security domain. So this connect with the JAG stuff.
That is not what we intend to do here.
I just want to say that there might be a fourth.
Okay. Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Atul.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Jeff, you requested one minute here. I know we're running out of time.
Yeah,
but
very quick. We talked to Jeff Romado. We talked about BFF into the chat on the side. There was a lot of discussion about that, about Depop access token going to a BFF, what the BFF should do with the backend resource. So I don't know, is TMB still in the air or not? But I think there is something to deal with that. So that was just any other business.
Okay. You want to comment, Justin? You have a comment? Okay. Mike, we're not going to be able to present slides because we are running out of time. If you have a minute here, you're going to speak.
Mike Jones. So there's a JOT BCP, RFC 8725, that listed a bunch of stuff that people could do wrong in their JOT implementations. People have done some more things wrong in their JOT implementations since that. They've been brought to our attention. We did a BIS version of the document. Yaron Sheffer, Dick Hart, and I took input from Aaron and several others. We've updated the draft. We believe that we have now described all the additional things that people have done wrong in their implementations and how to not do them. We believe this is ready for working group last call. There are 3 short slides that say the same thing in the agenda. But we would love to see this proceed so that we can get more do not do this advice out into people's hands.
Who reviewed the latest version of the draft?
Nobody. I published it 2 hours ago.
Oh, okay.
Actually, Aaron did.
Okay.
Aaron did.
Can we get some people to review the document first? Okay. Aren't anybody else? Come on, one more.
The
One
deltas
more.
are easy.
I already reviewed it.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks.
And there is a section at the end that says, these are the new things. It lists all the
Want to
sections.
say something?
So
Brian?
if you just read those, you're done.
Okay, Brian.
At the last one, we were asking for call to adoption. I said it's a much bigger job than you think you're getting into, and hope that you all would actually look at some of those things. And I even mentioned some of them. They haven't even been looked at or discussed. So the idea of going for working group last call after not doing anything is...
Oh, that's not true. You know that's not true.
After not addressing any of those things, it seems like that has been overlooked. So it's definitely not ready for working group last call.
Well, can you send to the list a list of the things that you think, or file issues, the things that you think we should also do?
Okay. Thank you, Mike. We're done here.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you all for coming, and safe travel. And thanks, Pam, for taking notes for us. Appreciate it.
Got stopped by the writing table. I had a question about transactional tokens. I didn't want to derail the time. We're talking about extending them. This says currently you don't have to respect the expiration time of the credential transaction token. So you're going to talk about extending them. I think you kind of have to. Otherwise, it's like to prevent arbitrary extensions of the lifetime.